Hi everybody, and welcome back to Isola TV with Isola.design Talks. Today we're going to talk with an artist, a designer, and a researcher that she presented a project about a tiny but so fundamental part of our life, of everyday life, that we meet every day. It's the part of pavement cracks, and so I'm happy to welcome Susanne Wieland. Hello,
Hi.
Susanne.
Hi, so nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you, and I'm so happy to have you here. So,
Yes,
how are
thank you
you?
for having me. I'm fine, thanks. I hope you're fine too, and everybody who's
Um,
watching.
yes. And tell us something about you, yourself, and your background.
Yeah, sure. So hi everybody, my name's Susanne Wieland. I'm a multidisciplinary designer, artist, researcher. I'm from Germany, but I'm currently based in London. And I come from a product design background, which I studied in Germany. And I just finished my MA in Material Futures here in London at Central St. Martin's. And my work revolves all around the fraught human nature relationship and how art and design can communicate and bring awareness to these complex topics. I think that's sort of a
Yeah,
summary.
and that's really interesting. We're going to talk about a lot of topics today,
Yeah.
and as a just where to start. Okay, so what's the inspiration behind the project? So describe a bit the project, that it's more an art piece than a design project, maybe we
Yeah.
can say, and describe it and what's the purpose, even if maybe purpose is not the right word to use it, but describe
We'll
it.
see. Yes. Yeah, sure. I'll try and make this as quick as possible because I have
Don't
the
worry.
inspiration came from like a lot of different backgrounds and like there was a mixture of inspiration. I started off with a material that is very dominant in cities, concrete. And concrete is this sort of material that is human made. And like if you go into the details of concrete, it gets very sort of problematic sustainability wise. But I mostly looked at the aesthetic values and the sort of the fact that it was so dominant in cities. And it's a material that has like allowed us to grow so much. It has allowed urbanization and growth, but it has also yeah, it has separated us from nature, like quite literally in cities. We have this concrete above the land and soil. So I was really interested in how nature has a place in this human-made world. And then I got to sort of yeah, look at all these in-between spaces that you can find that we humans don't really look at. And that scientists have actually found out that there's a lot of biodiversity sort of next to roads or where the railways go. Nature's thriving because it's the sort of in-between spaces. And pavements are a perfect example of that concrete world. But if you look close, there's actually a lot of nature in there. So that was my sort of starting point. And then I knelt down next to one single pavement crack, which I visited nearly every day for 6 months, to like research the inhabitants and like just sort of get to know all the stories that are in there. And the main purpose was to then sort of yeah, look into the small to discuss complex topics like growing urbanization, loss of knowledge, loss of biodiversity within cities around these species. So that was sort of the starting point for everything.
And I think that also the starting point of aware people of that from a so tiny and small thing that we meet really every day, we can be
Exactly.
more aware of how much important is nature in cities
Yes.
during our everyday life.
Yes, yeah, that was definitely also one part. It's just like an ecosystem that we step on in a split second, and nobody really thinks about it. Like if I'm rushing to the overground or the tube or a bus, you know, you don't sort of think, "Oh, I've just stepped on 38 ecosystems or something like that." But it just completely it doesn't cross our minds at all. And I thought that was really interesting as well because with a lot of nature, we don't really sort of realize it's there because it's not supposed to be there from a design perspective. Like we didn't build pavements for pavement crack ecosystems, you know, it's for pedestrian circulation, it's for us to walk on. So it's sort of also that tension there I found really interesting.
Of course, also because maybe we are used to uh, grow in cities, all really big, and then we never notice these things so tiny that are
Yeah,
rich of
yeah,
a lot of things, ecosystem, inhabitants, and green and nature.
yes,
So that's really interesting. And
yeah,
so in your on your website, I found a lot of stories. I
yeah.
hear I could hear a lot of stories behind this project. Do you
Mm.
want to tell us something about these stories?
Yeah, of course. So the main sort of outcome of my project was a accumulation of stories that I found in this one single pavement crack. Because the whole point was to like collect as many of the infinite stories that you can find in one pavement crack, just to demonstrate the complexity and the vastness of this tiny space, and yeah, there's a lot of stories, so I won't sort of tell them all because we'll be here for hours. But um, it's yeah, it ranges from how we've lost knowledge from medicinal plants that are now in pavement cracks, and it sort of comments on how we as humans, there was a time where these plants were so important, like everybody knew how they looked, like everybody knew their name because they were used to heal people, they were used for something that you took when you were ill. And now they're sort of just weeds, however you define that term. I think that's a new story, like why is it a weed, when is it a weed? um, and also, yeah, the fact, I think one of my favorite ones is about the common bittercress, which is a marshy wetland plant which has been in this area for like a long time, before this was London, before this was a city. When this was sort of steppe lands, and you had mammoths and elks, you had also common bittercress, and the fact that it sort of evolved in those times where it was like a lot of shifting environments because the ice melted, then it was flooded, then it wasn't. So this plant is really adapted to it. And now basically it's just like in this pavement crack that also floods from different reasons.
Yeah,
But it's like the same environment in a different time. And that actually makes it pre-adapted to city life. So a lot of species that are in cities are pre-adapted, it's called, where sort of it's similar circumstances, and the common bittercress is like one of these examples that it's just like it was allowed to enter into a city because it already knew how it could survive in ever shifting environments. So I think that's really a nice one. It's also a bit sad because it was sort of like, okay, once this was all nature and it could thrive, and now it's sort of yeah, stuck in a
uh,
pavement
uh,
crack. It's a bit,
yeah, of
yeah.
course. Yeah, but this can tell us also the story of the place where we live. Also, because maybe the
Yes, yeah.
ecosystem it's on your pavement cracks, it's different from the one it's here in Milan and
Of
from
yeah, 100%.
all.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and
Yes.
so this is important how the story of the place we are it can be told from so
Yes.
tiny things we meet
Yeah.
every day. Really,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my other favorite ones is actually about hair. And that also like it just comments on the surrounding more than sort of what's in there. Because I did a lot of soil samples, and I took them to the lab to have like, yeah, to take microscopic images and see what I could find. And I really, at some point, I sort of thought, oh, this is just fibers. It's probably just pollution, just.
Yeah.
But I actually, in the lab, I realized that it was all hair, and we sort of had this whole conversation about like, why is there so much hair? It's such a hairy ecosystem. But it was quite interesting
Because
because
a lot of people came by.
yeah, yeah, no, it's just, of course, you lose hair when you walk over it, then the rain flushes it into those spaces. So, of course, it makes a lot of sense. But it was very interesting because I didn't only find human hair. So, of course, you have human hair because we use pavement cracks, but there were also like animal hairs. And there was one that I liked specifically was like a fox hair, And we've got a lot of foxes here in London, as I know in a lot of cities you get foxes now. But it was so nice, and I wrote this little story about how this pavement crack that was designed for humans is now like used during the day for
Awesome.
humans. In the night, it's like maybe other species that are using our sort of built things, and how we sort of live next to each other, and how that
Yeah,
should
of
be
course.
more of a thing. Yeah.
And now, really, when we go to sleep, a new ecosystem goes out.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it sort of changes, and so many different species use it. It's not only us. So I think
Yeah.
that's really, really nice as well.
So, what do you think in the maybe it's a topic of awareness of people, but what do you think can be the role of these pavement cracks in our day everyday life? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries. Yes, I mean the whole project was around sort of awareness, but it also questions our current values, because these species, one species in I always say my pavement crack is called, it's not mine, it was just like the one I chose.
Yeah.
Um, there was one plant that is a coastal plant, so it really likes salty soil. Which of course in cities we give salt every year, every winter, when we put it over
Yeah.
pavements and roads. So it makes sense that you have a few coastal plants in pavement cracks, although you might be very far away from the sea. But these plants, or this one specific, that was the shepherd's purse, it doesn't only like that salty soil, it is also able to clean it from salt, which is
Hmm.
really good for all the other plants that aren't as well adapted maybe to the salt. So they clean it from soil, also from heavy metal, like not only that specific plant, but in general, these plants clean the soil from heavy metal, from pollution. A lot of them are dynamic accumulators, they're called. So they mineralize and fertilize the soil, and make it, they sort of turn depleted soil into viable soil again.
Yeah.
So they really, really play an important like role in creating an ecosystem, and creating biodiversity. And I mean, that is from a human perspective, like thinking as a human, thinking
Yes.
what does this plant bring? But if you look outside of the human view, of course it's food for pollinators. It's not only food, it's also a home. Like I really work closely with an ecologist from Berlin, and we had a lot of conversations, and she's actually looking into all the solitary bees and wasps that are living in Berlin pavement cracks. So it's not only a sort of, oh yeah, maybe somebody can get food there. It's actually also a home. And I sadly didn't find any bees or wasps, but I did find a lot of like other insects that were using these
Of course.
spaces. So yeah, I think there's so much value there that we
Yeah.
completely disregard, because my story ends with the pavement crack being sprayed by pesticides, which sort of happened right at the end of my project. And I think for my like dramatic storyline, it was good maybe because it came as quite of a shock, but also it like just highlights the fact how we think about these ecosystems, like they're just worth nothing. And they just sort of, they're seen as a safety hazard. They're seen as maybe something that is aesthetically not quite pleasing. And I think that's where the real sort of questioning kicks in, where you're just like, okay, I looked at this ecosystem for so long and I found so much value. Why is
Of
nobody
course.
seeing this? So I
Yeah.
think,
And I think maybe suggestion. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe this kind of ecosystem we can find also maybe not only in pavement cracks but also around the cities, or also other small corners of nature that have something else, maybe on the walls of the buildings, or maybe also between the houses. There a lot that is so small that but it's so important for the cities
yeah,
and the
yes,
citizens.
yeah. Yes, I mean, I at some point sort of concentrated on a pavement
Yeah,
crack,
of
because,
course,
of course,
of
the
course.
possibilities are endless. You could look at one wallflower. You could,
Yeah, of
but
course.
yes, it's the whole sort of motion of looking at something very small to ask like big questions that I really like, because everything is so complex. Like we live in a world where we realize that everything is just so complex, and it's quite
Yes,
frightening. Like if you sort of think, oh dear, if everything's connected, where do I start to find a solution? Where do I start to create awareness or communicate research? So I sort of thought, okay, by trying to look at something that is very defined in one space, that would help me. Actually, it just opens another door of infinity, because like
of
I could
course.
look,
Yeah.
but at least it's sort of a nice motion to yeah, to look at something small.
Yeah, of course. And I wanted to ask you something about also about your background and this
Yeah,
project in
sure.
particular, about the connection between art and design, because this is uh, a, a piece of art for his purpose, um, for his, I mean, all the meanings behind it. So, how do you think in your life, in all your projects, art and design contaminates each other?
Yes, I mean, I feel like me personally, my practice is very on the borderline of art and design.
Yeah,
Like some projects like this one, I personally would say are more on the art side. Others that I did are more on the design side. And I think during my masters, I definitely like explored the art side of my practice, because like I said, I came from a product design background. Well, I was allowed to be quite free, and I like looked into speculative design, and I had different sort of, yeah, I went into direction of sort of like questioning things, and seeing if we could not only create solutions but also awareness. But I think, yeah, I think you need both. Like, just that's just my personal opinion. Is that you, there's so the fact that the problems are so big, we sort of need people looking at it from different angles, getting
yeah.
different corners of it. So okay, maybe I just did the awareness part, somebody else is doing the solution, and then you sort of create a, yeah, maybe a way out
Uh,
of a
yes, of
problem.
course, something new between these two needs of
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
of everybody.
yeah.
And as a last question, I want to ask you how these pavement cracks can comment on future coexistence.
Yeah, I mean, for me, they're like the perfect example, because I think these little plants, they really invite us to live across boundaries again, which we somehow created. There's this division between humans and nature, and I'm looking at this from a Western worldview where I live in, and
Of course,
so yeah, I think they can sort of invite us to get back and merge more, and live next to each other. And I think, yeah, that's where my it starts with awareness and like changing values, and I think that's where my project sort of starts. Yeah.
okay. Okay, so thank you very much, Susanne. I'm really happy for this conversation. It was really
Yeah,
interesting.
thank you
And
so much.
I'm looking forward to meet you maybe sometime at some design week
Yes,
or some event. And
of course.
so,
Yeah.
or a next design talk. Okay.
Yes. Milan Design
Thank
Week,
you.
you will have.
Here we
Thanks
go.
so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks for
Susanne. Have a
having
good
me.
day.
You as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.